Hi, I'm Katarina Partti, and welcome to my speech about why cybersecurity is part of your job as a quality assurance engineer. I've talked with people in the testing community about cybersecurity, and I thought it was important to address this topic, as I see that the testers should think about the overall quality of the product, including security. So, what is it that a quality assurance engineer or a test automation specialist usually does? We are part of the software development team, and quality assurance should be part of the whole pipeline, starting from the specifications, supporting development, doing the testing, creating the automation, and regression testing. Most of us probably have some background on automation since we are here in RoboCon. I've been working with test automation for years, and I've always liked to break things, so hacking was kind of a natural next move for me. And eventually, cybersecurity became also part of my job. I have seen very different kind of projects in different companies. Many have been companies with very strict guidelines and even laws dictating on how to do things, like financial institutions. But I've also seen that rigid ways of doing can actually lead to a less secure end result. In the digital world we live today, there are more and more threats. Maybe there is something that we can do to help as individuals working with the software. Cybersecurity can feel as something quite hard and even scary, and the topic is not easy to approach. Many testers I've talked with say that they are interested in it, but don't necessarily know where to start, or feel that they don't even have time. It can even cause embarrassment when you think you should know more. I think traditionally cybersecurity has been seen as something that is tested on a separate occasion. But if the project's only effort towards secure software is a risk analysis before development or a security audit before deployment, then there might be a problem in the project management from the security perspective. I'm trying to make the topic a bit more approachable and hopefully encourage people to pay attention to the security details in their work too. So, when we do our job and pay attention to the quality, we shouldn't see security as something separate and outside our normal scope. What if I told you that everything is about security? There are cybersecurity threats in everything. If we make software that is hard to use or has such a bad grammar that people get accustomed to bad software, and it makes it harder for them to spot phishing and hoaxes when it actually happens. Weird links in messages and awkward language shouldn't be accepted. There are malicious actors scanning the internet all the time for weaknesses. These are automated bots, so it has nothing to do with how interesting or important your software is. If there is something in the internet by accident, or the software has easily identified flaws like bad credential management, there is a high risk for a breach. The problems can start already at the specification stage if the necessary criteria have not been taken into consideration. I'll use the performance as an example, but after the initial development, if the testing plan doesn't cover it, The worst case scenario is that a software in production is not available because too many people are trying to use it. So kind of like a distributed denial of service, except by accident. What I'm trying to say is that we, as quality assurance people, need to change the perspective. Cybersecurity is not just something tested and implemented in an isolated silo. Everyone should take responsibility for security. I've seen a lot of secure coding practices and actions for developers, but for some reason I think there is less talk in the testing community. When I look at requirements for testers, knowledge of cybersecurity is not something that is often mentioned. Now, you might think that, yeah, sure, but I have my own job being a tester or automation developer or something else. I don't have time to learn all the new stuff. But the good news is that you already have the knowledge. It's just about the perspective. Use your strengths and think about the things you're good at. For example, I love databases and complicated APIs. So going through schemas and mappings feels really fun to me. Sometimes the acceptance criteria of a feature is not written in a technical manner and don't cover what happens behind the UI. From security perspective, it's really important that data gets stored in the right place and it doesn't get mixed with something else. So checking that might be worthwhile. You can find a security aspect in almost everything. And also, nobody has to be perfect about everything. So think about what you know or what you like and start with it. For example, if you're a test automation specialist, start with your own repository first. I thought I'd share some thoughts of the topic from 3 perspectives. A bit general from the whole project-wise, then the product, meaning the software, and last, the regression testing. This is going to be really high level, but feel free to ask questions later. I'm now talking from my own experiences as I'm used to being part of the whole development process. But communication is essential. Asking the so-called stupid questions and being close to the development and also the business makes it really easy to do testing and then also notice if something is off or missing. I've noticed that many times developers see things from the perspective how something should be done so it will work, whereas the tester might think that what happens when I do something wrong? These are really important considerations already on the specification phase. As an example, it's not enough that a user can log in to their bank account. It's super important that they can't access someone else's account. Also, as a test automation developer, it's really different in every project how it's decided what to automate. In some projects, it is business decision, and even the test cases come straight from someone else. And in others, you can plan the tests yourself. Especially in the case when someone else gives you test cases, it's important to challenge them in a good way and talk about why the test is what it is and should something else be taken into consideration too. I've noticed that many places don't really have a testing plan. So there is a risk that something is forgotten. If your communication works well, it's natural for the developers to share their way of working. Also, it's important that you share about the testing, as the developers should have minimum of unit tests and some kind of end-to-end tests. If there are no silos between the developers and the testers, this can also make the testing coverage better, as you know how the developers test their code and you can plan your own tests according, so you don't do unnecessary work by automating the same. For example, if the developers already have good coverage in their end-to-end tests, maybe you can concentrate on the unhappy paths and integrations. You can also observe and share your ideas when you see how new people are introduced in the team. Do they get proper information of ways of working, or do they have to find out everything on their own? Having a safe environment to ask questions and to find out reduces the risk for incidents during the project. Also, if you see that the guidelines for good development or testing are not followed, it is your responsibility to speak up. Pay attention to how credentials, test data, and environments are managed. And I know the feeling when you're kind of stressed to raise a bug about a spelling mistake close to the deployment deadline when the developers are still busy with features. But it's really important part of the job to bring all flaws of the software visible. Many of us don't necessarily think it, but the so-called normal system testing is actually very security oriented. Usually in any system that has some kind of logging function, you'd test it with different user roles, with incorrect credentials, and maybe try to enumerate the account to something else after logging in with a basic user. Then you'd test all input fields for the possibility to insert unwanted characters or strings. And the same thing with anything where you can upload attachments, for example. Try it with the correct ones and the incorrect ones. See what happens when the upload limit for the size is exceeded. Paying attention to the error messages is basic. What you can do from the security perspective is try to see if they give out too much information. The thing about cybersecurity is that it doesn't matter how small the issue is. If you have enough many that can be used together, it can lead to massive problems. Information disclosure might seem harmless until someone uses the information for malicious cause. As a so-called normal tester, you don't have to try to exploit these problems, but just report them like you'd normally do. I've been in a situation with a clash of different cultures where developers have said that a problem with input sanitation is not a problem because the software is not supposed to be used incorrectly. In these cases, you can just escalate it to business and hope they realize the actual impact. From the traditional quality assurance perspective, regression testing is usually a test set that is run on a regular basis after changes have been made. The idea of regression testing is to reveal if the changes have affected other parts of the software. I think one important aspect is that regression testing should never be just happy path cases. When we think about cyber criminals, on what they do is they exploit the flaws in the software logic when someone does something they shouldn't. If you only test the happy paths, you have no way of knowing if the software works as expected when used incorrectly. As a test automation developer, you can start by adding test cases for negative scenarios. Think about the features where the user really should not be able to do something, like the already mentioned logging, certain inputs, and adding attachments. You can ask if there is a plan for the security regression testing. If not, you can incorporate some security testing in the automation tests. If you already have a good cover in the robot tests, why not just scan for vulnerabilities while the tests run? It's possible to use a designated cybersecurity tool with Robot Framework. I've seen this done on a complicated software where a normal security scanner wouldn't get too far. But using the already existing Robot Framework automation tests and running them through a proxy when scanning has been successful. My key takeaway from this speech is that take ownership for the quality and pay attention to details. Even if it feels like they're outside your direct scope of working, always ask questions. The worst that can happen is that something that is under control and actually someone else's responsibility, and then you know about it. But there is always the possibility that the project is so vast and complicated that the thing you asked about is just something that was forgotten or not thought about, or someone else thought it's someone else's responsibility. And also believe in yourself. You're already an expert, and you can continue by adding new layers on top of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Katarina. We're about to go live. I see you in the green room. Let's do this. Hey, Katarina, welcome to RoboCon.
Hi, and thank you for having me.
Awesome to have you. I love this topic. I told you this already, but we have a bunch of questions, so let's jump right to them. First one is, are there any good resources for testers to learn security? Something like OWASP or anything else you recommend?
Yeah, OWASP definitely. They give good guidelines of like what is good development and what kind of security issues you should look for. Then that is more kind of like theoretical. But if you want to try out something that like penetration testing or something like that, then try Hackme is a good one. They have these like small online labs where you can first try out the theory and then try out like in real life how it feels to try to penetrate into a system.
What's it called? Hackme?
Try Hackme.
Try Hackme. Cool. Everyone definitely check that out. I think that's an awesome resource. Are there any libraries you would use in Robot Framework to develop security tests?
I actually haven't tried any certain libraries. At the moment, I'm working on this integration with trying to get some kind of like OWASP SAP or Burp Suite to work with robot framework. So the robot framework, or like the automation tests, are run through a proxy, and then there's an automatic scanner going through at the same time. And this works really well in like very complex systems where you don't really get far with just like inserting credentials and then doing stuff. So it's good to have the automation tests that show like where to go with the scanner. But yeah, this is actually something that I've been thinking of working with. That like if I run into many problems with this, then I might come up with a library myself next year. I know there is some problems with the proxy because you need to get the certificate to work and everything, but we'll see in real life how big the problem gets.
Nice. I think we had a session last year with Joshua. He mentioned, I think, Zap proxy. There's something with Zap that you could do with security. It seems pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right. Next session.
Yeah, it's the OWASP Zap, which is the other tool that I mentioned. Yeah.
So do you have examples of real bugs you found using this approach?
I guess like since I already mentioned APIs, I could mention this. Like there was one system where once you had inserted some credentials and you were able to make these like API calls, then for some reason the information was not encoded in any way, and you could actually just change the data. So you could enumerate the API calls to give you back anything. that would probably be one. And then let's say when you have attachments you add attachments to something. There was one system where they had limitations, like in the normal systems testing, you would check the specifications and see that like certain attachments are allowed and others aren't. So you would try with the ones that are allowed and ones that are not. But then I also did that I just changed the end. I had like a text file. Text files were not allowed, and I would just it was actually something that is used to check if the system recognizes malware. It's not malware, but it contains like certain strings that are recognized as malware normally. So I would just change the end to JPEG, and the system allowed me to insert it. So the only check for the attachment type was the ending, which is not like very good way of doing it.
Right. Oh, cool find for sure. So does this apply to all types of development, like greenfield, also like legacy systems? Any quick suggestions or wins for testers that can implement automation to get security coverage without touching the code or without major code changes?
I'd say that this is probably best approach for exactly legacy systems. Like if they are systems that may have been security tested when they went live or something, but then they've been under all kinds of changes during the years, and then maybe no one has checked whether the security is still there or not. So if you already have like heavy automation on the system, and you can just like add a scanner there, so that when you have automation going on, then there's the scanner scanning all the pages. Then there is in the cybersecurity world, it's called like dynamic application security testing, like DAST. So there are like different tools for like having the scanner directly in the pipeline, but then I'm approaching it from the tester side, that like if you already have testers and the project doesn't want to pay for extra security testing, then you might want to like at least try something. So
right. Cool.
we get some added security.
Right, right. So, when you try to get those out of security, you're trying to get buy-in from management. Are there any metrics that you use to find out, or to show leadership, hey, we're adding value with security testing? Here are the a metric that I don't know, uh, security faults found. I don't know what the metric or reports would
Yeah.
be. Any ideas?
Well, at least here in Europe, like the easiest way to convince is just like talk about legislation.
Ah,
Like for example, GDPR. Like if there is anything to do with people information, you can always say that like, hey, how much is 4% of the
oh yeah.
annual yield? And
You win that argument every time, I
yeah,
guess. That's a
yeah, yeah.
good.
Money is usually the best way to win everyone on your side.
Right. Nice. You mentioned testers should challenge requirements that lack security. What tips do you have for productively discussing with developers who may not see it as a priority?
Um, yeah, this is actually a really tough one because I've been in this situation myself, like with where developers don't understand why the security features are important. But usually the projects where I've been working, they're so big that like if you climb up like long enough to the ladder and you find the person who maybe you talk about money, then say
Right.
that like, hey, you know what happens like if people find out and this goes live. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned something in your session. I forgot what it was. You found an issue, you reported, and the developer's like, "Ah, no one would ever do that." And you said, "You
Yeah.
report it, but let management make the decision." So you're not a gatekeeper. You're just giving information, show management what the impact is, and let them decide. I guess.
Yeah, well, I guess it depends on like on the problem. Like
Mm,
with normal bugs, that's what I do. Like I just report them and that's that. But with security, I'm kind of passionate. Like when it comes to um, like important software, where there is a possibility that uh, people's personal information can go into wrong use, then I'm not a fan of that.
right,
I'd
right,
rather keep everything sanitized.
for sure. We probably have time for one or two quick questions. Is it always bad to have duplicate test in unit and acceptance test?
Mm, I don't think it is, and it depends on like the environments. Like if they're in different environments, for example, then no. But then if it's basically just like the same test written in different language, then I don't really see the use in it. I think it would make more sense to have more communication between the developers and the testers, so everyone could use the same results instead of like doing the same thing over and over again.
Sure. And time for one last question. Uh, how do you decide what kind of security test you need? Do you follow any guideline specification to the product you're developing?
Um, I guess this is also kind of like project related, but I usually work in like banks and institutions like that, so then it's not up to me. It's there are like laws dictating what to do, and also there are like dedicated people who help and test managers and so on.
Awesome. And I got rid of a question. I should have kept it up, but it had to do with uh, using open source tools that may have exploits in it. Do you have any suggestions on that that could cause an issue? Here it is. It is. How do you deal with the fact that open source libraries, for example, from PyPy, can contain malicious software?
I guess it's just a matter of keeping current, like following the news and like everything that's going on, because it's just like the same thing goes for NPM, for example. There might be like third-party stuff in the code anyway. So it's like this is a possibility everywhere, and it's just like one thing to keep your eyes open.
Absolutely. Great advice. Once again, thank you so much for this session. As I mentioned, I think it's an awesome session that everyone should listen to over and over again in the replays as well. So thank you, Katarina, for contributing to RoboCon. Appreciate you.